to start. But luckily it was mostly just my presentation, so we can post that.
I just wanted to echo what Senator Brenner said. I think from my perspective, having watched this develop, I feel this is how these types of projects should go. I think I'm just grateful to have been able to be a small part of it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what everyone does next and the full implementation of all of these programs. I do have a question about the time spent grants. Now there are farmers who were on the DEP, potentially the DEP spreading list, but didn't have contamination. And and those folks also had to spend some time responding. I'm thinking of a particular farmer. And so I'm wondering if those folks, even though they aren't contaminated, if they have access to those grants. Not that they necessarily would, but I think it would be a good clarification.
Yeah, so as the rules are written, they aren't eligible. One of the criteria is DACF confirmed contamination. But you're right. I see your point. They were on the list, they had testing. There was a period before they got their test results back when undoubtedly they were very concerned. Something I want to talk about a little later is some revisions to the rules. They are, 3 months old, and I already want to change some. So not change wholesale, but just make them operate better. So that's something we could certainly consider. Amanda?
Yeah, I just also wanted to echo my appreciation. I know I've said it to you, Beth, but you've just been so thoughtful in this whole process, and I feel really lucky to have you in the role that you're in. And thank you to everybody who has served on this committee. And I know there were a number of different subcommittees and a lot of work that's been done to get us to this point. And I just want to say a special thank you to the farmers that have put their time into this. You've given a lot of time, but I think it has everything to do with us being where we are and making sure that we get this right. But to Beth's point, right, once we start to implement these programs, we're probably going to have some new learnings, and there might be some tweaks that we need to make. But I think we're starting from a really good foundation. And the last thing I'll just share is that last week DACF hosted all of the Northeast State Departments of Agriculture for our annual summer meeting. And we had a PFAS panel with some of the farmers on this committee, as well as Beth and Senator Brenner, talk about their experience. And I didn't want to start the meeting off with such a heavy topic, but that's where it fit in our agenda. And we had a lot of people saying to us after it was over that they didn't realize that they were going to feel so hopeful after a panel on PFAS. So, and that is, the work of everybody here and everybody in the state agencies, including DEP and CDC, that have been working so hard together and with our legislature. And I just want to say that, it's nice to be able to hear that feedback, that we are inspiring other states to tackle this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Loisum, did you have your hand up earlier? No? Okay.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Would this be a good time?
Sure.
My first question is about the land buyback and the options that will be available. Is leasing an option?
That's tricky to answer. I think so.
Okay.
So our statute speaking of changes, says the department can buy and sell land. It doesn't explicitly say we can lease land. That is, the department is likely to be submitting a departmental PFAS bill to give statutory authority to the PFAS response program and also to clean up our statutes a little bit. And to make it explicitly clear that we can lease property. But within the implementation plan, we do include leasing property as an option.
Great. And then my other two questions, I think, are probably for Commissioner Loizon. I'm curious if you can give us a brief update on Tier 3 numbers and what that looks like. And then my second question for you is, with the discussion around the CERCLA definition for PFOA and PFAS, how would that affect our farmland that's most contaminated?
Sure. I don't have the Tier 3 numbers off the top of my head. I know that we are making good progress working our way through those sites. So I hesitate to give you anything that's sort of an inaccurate number. It is very much in process. And that we are planning on coming back to the legislature in January to give a full update on whether we'll be able to successfully complete everything, including our Tier 4 sites by the time frame that was established in the law. But we are making good progress through those sites and are pleased that we still have not encountered any new areas of significant contamination, which was something that we had feared would happen as we went through this process, that frankly, we were afraid we'd find another Fairfield along the way, and have been pleased so far that the approach of focusing first on the sites where we had the information about the most material having been spread seems to have led us to the highest risk sites first, but no, we can still always be surprised. In terms of the hazardous substance listing, EPA has put out guidance indicating that for properties like farms where biosolids were spread, that they would not recommend treating those property owners as responsible parties under CERCLA. That was not included in explicitly in rule language. That is more a matter of documented enforcement discretion by EPA. We do have some more protections that have been set forth in state law, and pursuing responsible parties under CERCLA has always been a certain matter of discretion in terms of the level of contamination and who's identified as the RP that's ultimately held responsible. But again, at the federal level, EPA seems to be clearly acknowledging that there are parties that could under CERCLA have been held as RPs that EPA does not intend to pursue. But that's the best we have from them at this point.
Thank you.
I wanted to follow up on your comment about presenting to ENR and the Ag Committee. The PFAS funds report that's due March of every year also goes to Health and Human Services as well. So maybe have all three committees together. Thank you, everybody, for the positive feedback. It's been a heavy lift, but I've worked with really great people, both on this committee, within the department, at other agencies. So many hands make light work. Thank you all. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how do we continue to work together? And, you know, it was easy when we were building the plan and we had we had at least a self-imposed deadline to get that plan done. Now, I value the input of this committee, as has already been said this morning. Having the perspective of farmers has been critical as we've built this program. Having input from the other organizations, agencies, the legislature is all critical. We are So I don't know, like, I have some thoughts, but I guess I would like to hear from all of you.
I'm a farmer that is not a fan of meeting just for the sake of meeting. I want a goal, I want a task, I want to fulfill my responsibilities and
Mhm.
duties, so. That being said, I don't know what those are right now and how that would influence meeting, but. That's my baseline.
Okay, I agree. Meeting for the sake of meeting is. We probably all have better things to do. So under our statute, and this is something I had noted in the fund's report to the legislature last year. The advisory committee, so not the department, but you guys are obligated to have 2 public hearings annually to take input from the public on administration of the fund. I had proposed that that be changed to 1 public meeting annually to get public input. The last 2 Januaries, we've had meetings at the agricultural trade show for that purpose. And also the nomenclature. There's a distinction between a public hearing, which is what the department has to do when we go through rulemaking. So that's another public process. That's very structured in terms of publishing a public notice. There has to be so many days between publication, the hearing, comment period has to be open for a set amount of days. There needs to be a written response to all the comments. So it's a very formal process, which is different from the public meetings that we've had, like at the agricultural trade show or last summer when we released the first complete draft of the PFAS fund implementation plan, where again, we invited the public in to comment on a specific document. And I feel it's most useful to meet when we have something for folks to react to, as opposed to kind of general meet twice a year because the statute says we have to. Jessica, Representative Fay.
Thanks, Beth. I have a few thoughts, actually. And I'm glad you mentioned the public meeting versus public hearing, because I think that's a really important distinction in how that meeting is run and how comfortable people feel participating in it, as we found. So I think I'll start there. You mentioned the ag trade show, and I guess the question is, if you're soliciting input from the public and primarily from farmers about how things are going and how it's working for them, and that potentially requires a statutory change. The timing of doing that in January could be a little bit problematic in terms of making any statutory changes that are required in a timely fashion, because the legislature would already be in session and would already be meeting. So I think I just want to flag that from a process and timing perspective. And then I'd love to just talk about the role of legislators in this committee. And I think with the number of meetings reduced, that may change a little bit. But I also wonder if not necessarily requiring that the chairs be legislators. This was really set up statutorily like a legislative study commission or committee, and it might make sense to revisit that structure a little bit so that there's less turnover, less transition, and the chairs have more our schedules, the legislative schedules don't get in the way of making the work happen quickly.
Yeah, that's a fair concern. You're just so busy during the session that finding a time for everybody to get together has been challenging. Nancy.
Yeah, Beth, I was just going to offer that, Maine CDC, me personally, I'm willing to do whatever is most valuable to this effort. So if you have ideas for how we can best participate, I would, so far it's been great. So whatever you need, I think I'm willing to commit to.
Well, thank you. Circling back to Representative Bay's comments about the ag trade show not necessarily being the best time. If we want legislative change to come out of a public meeting, when would a good time of year be? October? Looking at the producers mainly.
Would that be, well, is that part of the legislative calendar, good time? I mean, I think that's where.
You want me to chime in?
Sure, yeah.
I think the question would be, going forward, if you wanted to change the way it's written statutorily and with the legislative cycle, we wouldn't be able to make a change until sometime in the middle to the end of January, and it would have to go as an emergency bill, and everyone would have to agree, or at least 2/3 would have to agree on it. So we wouldn't be able to make a change for the 2025 calendar year's ag trade show meeting. If we wanted to have it, it would have to still essentially be designed and delivered in the same fashion as it has been. The alternative would be that you don't schedule something in January, we make a statutory change, and then you can have a different style of meeting later in the year. Or we run it the same way we have been, and we make that change, and then in 26 it's different. Does that make sense?
It does. I think having the meeting having a meeting at Ag Trade Show is a really great opportunity and a unique opportunity to combine comments from both producers as well as eaters and consumers and residents. I think it's really the only venue that you could do that. But when to have that more impactful legislative process type meeting, I'm just wondering when you think that is it too late for that this year?
Well,
Or,
we're not in session,
right,
so to make the change to statute, we'd have to start that process in January.
okay, so
Yeah.
when would you're saying October would be the time? That's,
Well, so if we had a meeting in October, would that be sufficient time to tee up legislation for the next session, or would you need, like, when is closure
Closures in December.
in December?
I think
So-
I'll chime in here if that's okay. I think October makes sense because I think you really want to start the planning process, have all your ducks in a row, and think about strategies first so that you can hit the ground running right off the bat in January, so that you have a sponsor, that bill gets put in early, hopefully in the early November or mid-November, and then those pieces you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time on. Just my 2 cents.
so in answer to your question, October's busy, but I think it's a very good month for producers and an opportunity perhaps for others as well. I mean, it's better than September. September, yeah.
And November, we might be too time constrained to get a thoughtful,
You only
Yeah.
have 3 weeks in November.
right, with
Reality.
Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're looking at a public meeting in October, maybe we would have an advisory committee, a brief advisory committee meeting a month ahead of that to prepare for the public meeting. I'm seeing some head nods. And then, yeah, I think as the program rolls out, inevitably there'll be hiccups along the way. But I try to keep the committee involved, when there is, a matter where I need outside input. And I can commit to continuing to do that.
I appreciate that. And I just wanted to go back to the meetings. We're not suggesting discontinuing a public meeting at Ag Trade Show, correct? Or
Right.
possibly in the future, maybe discontinuing it, but in the meantime, I just feel it would be very important, since it will have been a few months or at least 2 quarters of a rollout of this program. It would be really great to get that mix, that really good mix of that venue, especially the way, I don't know if you were going to replicate the opportunity that you provided last year for people to have those conversations privately. But
Yeah.
anyway.
Oh, I think for certain, the PFAS fund will be at the agricultural trade
Okay.
show. I guess it's a question of whether that should be the advisory committee hosting a meeting like you have in the past, or whether it's the PFAS fund.
Okay.
State, DACF hosting that meeting. I guess regardless of like who's technically hosting, I would want as many advisory committee members there as possible so that you can hear what we're hearing as well.
I think that's key.
Yeah. And separate from the meeting we had during the agricultural trade show, DACF, DEP, CDC, who else? Maine Farmland Trust, MAFCA, we had a PFAS table. So, and we tried to staff it with representatives from different organizations throughout the day, so that if anyone had a PFAS question, there was a central point to come to. And if I couldn't answer the question, maybe DEP or MFT could answer. And that seemed to work really well. And I think we'll be doing that again this year.
I think that would be great, because as a producer and my peers, as land starts becoming available for leasing and renting, it's hard to navigate. Hard to navigate. I say no a lot just because out of fear. And
Yeah.
I'm literally taking food off my cow's table.
So thinking about statutory changes, I think preliminarily, I've already mentioned I want to change, hearings to meetings, and one requirement per year, which doesn't mean we can't have more. I mean, right now we're talking about having 2 anyway, but maybe not to be, some years it may not make sense, but maybe the October, January rhythm will make sense going forward. And this is all evolving. We're building it as we go. So to have some flexibility there would be welcome. If we were to change it such that the co-chairs are not appointed through the legislature, I guess we need to give some thought to how co-chairs would be identified. I don't know, as a vote among the members appointed by Commissioner Beal. There are a number of options there as well.
Beth,
Yes.
I think that is a discussion that might require some thought. And I don't know necessarily whether that's a thing that we want to do at this meeting, or maybe, come back in October and think about, take some time and really think about what the appropriate structure is. Because each has its merits, and I wouldn't want to just kind of go into it brashly. I will say, I mean, as we were putting this together, the structure was originally a little bit different as passed out of the committee, and then in the budget process, the Appropriations Committee, one of our members made some suggestions about how how this should be structured and the chairs and the appointments and everything. And that ended up as part of the negotiation and as how this ended up with the structure that we have. And I think it was a fairly speedy decision. So just to put some context on why this is made up the way that it's made up. And I don't think that there's a lot of jeopardy in rethinking it. But when we do that, I think we should do it really carefully.
Agreed. Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that we make that decision today, but just wanted to tee up the conversation. I take your point, maybe this could be a point of discussion when we gather again in the fall, and we can give it some consideration before then. What are we doing on time? 11. Anything further?
I don't want to add on time, but I just want to say that when I am traveling and when I am representing Maine dairy farmers nationally and globally, it is really with a lot of pride that I can talk about the work that you have done personally, as well as the work of the legislature, the farmers on this committee, and everyone that's been involved in all the task forces. And it's not very often you get to say that the government said that they're the government and they're here to help, but I'm able to say that they did in Maine. So thank you very much, because it is a very emotional issue. And I appreciated what Commissioner Beal said about people feeling hopeful. I really love the fact that I give people an idea that there's a way through. And that's sometimes the most awful thing. At the worst moment, and I wasn't even directly impacted on my farm, I really felt there was no way through. So thank you.
Well, thank you all. This has definitely been a joint effort. We're a good team. Okay, well, if nothing else, I will let you get on with your days.
Good to see everyone.
Yes. And
Thank you.
thanks, everyone.
There's gonna be a plug somewhere. You just pull it.
right? More satisfying.